Do you think you know someone just by looking from the outside? What if I told you that the mind of a teenager can be more dangerous and fascinating than any parallel universe you have ever imagined? Donnie Darko is not just a strange boy from school, he is an observer of time, destiny, and life, trapped between reality and hallucination. Get ready to discover how traumas, omens, and a giant rabbit can reveal truths that no one wants to face. And the question that remains is, what if you were also ignoring signs that would change everything around you? If you are a fan of cinema, psychology, and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any video. From what part of the world are you watching this video right now? Leave your answer in the comments. Donnie Darko is not just another lost teenager in a common suburban town. He is that restless mind that always seems to be 2 steps ahead of everyone else. While his classmates live the predictable routine of high school, Donnie watches the world with a mix of skepticism and almost painful curiosity. He questions everything, from small social conventions to the deepest mysteries of existence. And in that critical gaze, the viewer already begins to connect with someone who is more than he appears to be. After all, who has never felt out of place or misunderstood at some point in life. But don't think Donnie is just a too smart boy. He carries a sensitivity that makes him vulnerable. A kind of sensitivity that frightens and fascinates at the same time. He feels deeply, notices details most people ignore, and that puts him in constant conflict with the world around him. School, neighbors, even his own family seem small and limited compared to his expansive perception. And it is precisely this difference that plants the seed of the inner conflicts we will see throughout the film. Donnie also deals with symptoms that defy simple explanations. He has episodes of sleepwalking, enigmatic visions, and a sense of foreboding that follows him like a silent shadow. To any normal person, this might seem strange or even frightening. For Donnie, it is just part of his daily routine, something he learns to integrate into his perception of reality. We can already sense that he is someone who lives between 2 worlds, the visible and the invisible, the rational and the inexplicable. And speaking of the invisible world, it's impossible to ignore the figure of Frank the giant rabbit, who appears to guide him, or perhaps to disturb him. Frank is like a manifestation of his fears and instincts, a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. His presence in the first minutes of the film establishes an almost dark, fairy tale atmosphere, but also prepares the viewer to dive into Donnie's complex mind. It's impossible to watch and not ask what is real and what is a creation of his mind. At the same time, Donnie is someone who seeks connection. He feels a curious attraction to people who, at first glance, seem superficial or ordinary. He approaches girls like Gretchen with an inquisitive yet genuine gaze, trying to decipher not only their stories but also what they reflect about himself. Here, we already begin to see that his conflict is not only internal, he also struggles to fit into a world that seems unable to understand the complexity of his mind. Another essential trait is Donnie's sharp sense of humor, that kind of irony that cuts and enlightens at the same time. He uses wit as a shield, testing social limits and making it clear that he will not submit to others' expectations without questioning. This trait makes his personality even more magnetic to the audience because it combines intelligence, vulnerability, and a touch of rebellion. Who has never wanted, at least once, to challenge the world with an observation that only you noticed? But not everything is a joke or sarcasm. Donnie carries a constant sense of urgency, as if he is aware of something others ignore. He feels that time is relative, that certain actions have consequences most people never imagine. And it is this awareness that creates an almost tangible tension, leaving the viewer curious and, at the same time, uneasy. Here, the film invites us to think, are we all ignoring perceptions of our own? So deep down, Donnie Darko is both an ordinary and extraordinary teenager. He is vulnerable, clever, irreverent, and unsettling. He questions, feels, and perceives, navigating between tangible reality and the mysteries that only he seems to notice. And it is precisely this duality that will lead us to the most intense conflicts of the film. Since each of his traits is an open door to psychological dilemmas that challenge our own perception, we can hardly wait to discover the first internal shocks he will face. From an early age, Donnie carries that uncomfortable feeling of not fitting in. as if he were looking at the world from outside a shop window. He watches classmates and family members move through predictable routines while he feels that something deeper pulses beneath the surface. It's that kind of displacement that anyone who has ever felt different knows well, the strangeness of noticing patterns no one else sees. This feeling begins to shape his decisions and how he relates to the world, almost as if he is constantly on alert. School, in particular, is a stage of small frustrations and humiliations that, when accumulated, feed Donnie's internal conflict. Teachers who don't understand his questions and classmates who mock his peculiarities make him an invisible yet painfully present target. He learns to deal with these small social wounds using irony and sarcasm, but each misinterpreted comment or disapproving look leaves silent scars. And it is in this setting that his sense of alienation begins to intensify. Donnie's home also doesn't offer the refuge one might expect. Although he loves his family, there is an invisible barrier between him and his parents, a disconnection that increases his sense of loneliness. He tries to express his concerns, but doesn't always find answers that make sense. This creates a constant tension where the teenager learns that life can be both welcoming and indifferent depending on perspective, a universal dilemma for anyone who has ever felt misunderstood at home. And it is in this context that the first signs of anxiety and deep restlessness appear. Donnie feels as if he carries an invisible burden, a responsibility no one else perceives. This sensation manifests itself in strange dreams, obsessive thoughts, and the need to seek explanations for everything around him. Here, the viewer begins to realize that his conflict is not only social or familial, it is existential, and that gives the film an almost hypnotic layer of complexity. Furthermore, his perception of time and destiny begins to torment him. He feels that certain events are predestined, that invisible forces are guiding his actions. This premonition increases his sense of isolation because no one else shares this view of the world. For Donnie, each small choice carries an unusual weight, as if the universe were testing him. This conflict between objective reality and his subjective perception is the first great engine of his psychological journey. His relationships with schoolmates also reflect this trauma. While some teenagers indulge in superficial games, Donnie feels the need to seek meaning, to dig beneath the surface. This puts him in constant tension with friends and acquaintances, creating a cycle of closeness and distance that reinforces the feeling of displacement. He wants to connect, but the world insists on being shallow, and he insists on seeking depth. An interesting aspect of this conflict is how it manifests itself in small gestures and thoughts that go unnoticed by others. A closer look reveals anxiety, restlessness, and a painful awareness of his own difference. These details make him human and fascinating, allowing the audience to identify with him in an almost visceral way. It is in this delicate balance between vulnerability and wit that Donnie begins to become a memorable and complex character. Finally, this initial trauma and sense of displacement function as the foundation for all subsequent conflicts in the film. Every decision Donnie makes, every interaction he has, carries the weight of this silent alienation. It's as if the universe were preparing the ground for him to confront not only external mysteries, but also his own internal dilemmas. And it is exactly here that we begin to see the emergence of a second, even deeper conflict. Frank's visions and the thin line between reality and hallucination, Donnie Darko begins to see Frank, that giant and disturbing rabbit, as a presence that defies all logic. He appears suddenly, often at tense moments, as if he were a messenger from a parallel universe. To anyone else, it would be just a delusion, but for Donnie, Frank is disturbingly real. And it is in this threshold between hallucination and reality that one of the character's greatest psychological conflicts arises: how to trust your own senses when they seem to conspire against you. Frank is not just a bizarre figure, he becomes a dark guide for Donnie, showing paths no one else sees. Frank's instructions defy morality, routine, and the very notion of time. Each appearance is a silent provocation. Do this, observe that, prepare for the inevitable. This mix of threat and guidance creates an internal whirlwind where Donnie must decide between following his intuitive perception or ignoring signs that seem supernatural. The psychological impact of this presence is profound. Donnie begins to question whether his mind is truly connected to reality or if he is at the mercy of an elaborate delusion. Each interaction with Frank provokes anxiety and fascination, a dangerous combination that keeps the viewer on the edge of their seat. And it is exactly this tension between fear and curiosity that creates an almost tangible internal drama, as if we were inside Donnie's own mind. At the same time, Frank's instructions lead Donnie to confront acts of rebellion and destruction. He begins to realize that the line between right and wrong is not as clear as he once imagined. The rabbit gives no easy answers. He merely points directions, leaving the final choice to Donnie. This sense of responsibility and absolute power causes a deep moral conflict. How far is it justifiable to follow orders that seem beyond human understanding? The relationship with Frank is also a metaphor for Donnie's isolation. While everyone around him lives predictable and superficial lives, he interacts with an entity only he can perceive. It's a parallel to the sense of displacement he already carried. No one understands his experiences. No one shares his perceptions. And in this isolation arises a kind of loneliness that is both distressing and revealing, pushing him to dive deeper into his own mind. Moreover, this relationship creates a sense of urgency and inevitable fate. Frank does not appear by chance. Each message carries weight and meaning, and Donnie feels that time is against him. This distorted perception of time and space increases anxiety, making every decision critical and every step unpredictable. The viewer, along with Donnie, feels the tension of standing on the edge of something grand but potentially destructive. It is interesting to note how this conflict manifests itself in small daily habits and thoughts. Donnie begins to test limits, observe patterns, and question every detail of the world around him. This hyper-awareness turns his actions into something almost ritualistic, an attempt to control what seems uncontrollable. Here we see Donnie's mind working like a complex machine, trying to decipher invisible codes no one else can read. In the end, Frank's presence and the constant questioning of reality shape a deep layer of Donnie's internal conflict. He is not only fighting external forces or social rules, he confronts his own perception of existence. Each step he takes is a dive into uncertainty, an invitation to explore the unknown. And it is precisely this clash between hallucination and reality that prepares us for the next conflict, even more personal and emotional. The relationship with family and the feeling of misunderstanding. Donnie, despite loving his family, constantly feels that they live in different worlds within the same house. His parents are well-intentioned, but their worries and behaviors seem superficial compared to the complexity of his mind. He tries to communicate, but it's like talking to walls. Words sound empty or misinterpreted. This barrier creates frustration and a sense of loneliness, which the viewer quickly perceives as part of the weight he carries. His siblings and family routine also add a layer of silent tension. Every small domestic conflict, from schedules to expectations, becomes amplified in Donnie's perception. What would be trivial to others is, for him, a constant reminder that the world seems designed not to accommodate minds like his. This feeling of displacement seeps into his psyche, turning each family interaction into a delicate dance between connection and frustration. Donnie often feels judged or misunderstood at home. His ideas, fears, and worries don't receive real attention, which increases his sense of invisibility. He must learn to navigate between expressing himself and protecting himself, developing emotional intelligence that is both strategic and painful. It's this mix of vulnerability and wit that makes the audience realize his inner battle is not just adolescent, but existential. The father figure, though protective, often represents limits that Donnie perceives as restrictions on his freedom to think and feel. He struggles against this perception, trying to reconcile respect with the need to explore his own mind. This tension creates a constant moral and emotional conflict: how to obey without losing yourself and how to assert yourself without hurting important relationships. It's a dilemma that many young people and adults can recognize in some form. Donnie's mother also plays a crucial, even if indirect, role. She symbolizes love and care, but also the conventional world that seems unable to grasp his depth. Every well-intentioned piece of advice, every worried question, sounds to Donnie like an echo of a reality he cannot fully reach. And it is precisely in this disconnection that the internal conflict grows, turning home into a space of both support and frustration. This feeling of misunderstanding causes Donnie to turn inward, developing intense and almost obsessive reflection about his own emotions. He needs to learn to trust his judgments and perceptions, even when no one else believes him. This process of self-awareness is painful, but also essential to the character's evolution. It's like learning to walk alone on unstable ground, but necessary to discover who he truly is. Curiously, these family tensions also provide opportunities for learning and subtle humor. Donnie observes behavioral patterns, small hypocrisies, and peculiarities of his relatives, often reacting with sarcasm or irony. It's in this space that his wit manifests itself, balancing emotional weight with lightness and humanity. The audience connects because we have all had moments when looking at family reveals more about ourselves than about them. Finally, Donnie's relationship with his family is not only a conflict of misunderstanding, it is also a lens to understand his choices and limits. Every domestic frustration, every misunderstanding fuels the emotional tension that drives him toward deeper and more complex decisions. And it is exactly this foundation of internal conflict that prepares us to explore how he deals with morality and conscience. Donnie's next great psychological challenge. Donnie Darko constantly finds himself facing dilemmas that challenge his sense of right and wrong. Every action, every decision seems to carry a weight that goes beyond the ordinary. As if the universe were watching him and evaluating each move, he realizes that small choices can generate enormous consequences, and this awareness creates an almost constant tension. For anyone, dealing with ethics is challenging. For Donnie, it is a daily battle between impulse, logic, and premonition. Frank's teachings, combined with Donnie's sharp perception, lead him to question social rules and moral norms. He observes that most people follow patterns without thinking, while he feels the responsibility to act according to his own logic. It is at this point that a deep conflict arises. To what extent should we submit to conventions? And when is it time to trust our own intuition? This dilemma makes the character fascinating and complex, leaving the viewer reflecting on personal choices. Donnie's actions often flirt with transgression, but they always carry an awareness of consequence. He knows that every step can change lives, and that increases the internal tension. It is not just about teenage rebellion, it is a constant analysis of causality and responsibility. He questions, if I do this, will it be right or wrong? Am I helping or hurting? This kind of deep reflection is something that many viewers do not even dare to admit they have had. Donnie's morality is also revealed in his interactions with vulnerable people, such as his classmates and Gretchen. He finds himself in a position where he can influence or protect, and each choice carries meanings that go beyond the immediate. These moments show that his ethics are not imposed by external rules, but built from consciousness, empathy, and sharp perception. And it is precisely this moral autonomy that creates fascination and tension in his journey. Donnie also experiences the weight of guilt intensely, even when there is no direct responsibility. He feels the impact of tragic or unjust events, and that makes him reflect on his own position in the world. This internal conflict between action and consequence creates fertile ground for existential questioning. For the viewer, it is impossible not to wonder, what would I do if I were in his place? Another interesting aspect is how he deals with the unpredictability of people and destiny. Donnie realizes that not everything can be controlled, yet he insists on seeking meaning. This constant search is both anguish and a driving force for growth. He learns, sometimes painfully, that ethics and morality are not black and white. They are nuances that require courage, reflection, and, above all, authenticity. The tension between external rules and internal conscience also opens space for subtle humor and irony. Donnie observes ridiculous behaviors and absurd norms, often reacting with sarcasm as if saying, really, everyone is following this without questioning. This contrast between ethical depth and ironic lightness makes his story more human and relatable to the viewer, balancing drama and identification. In the end, this moral conflict serves as fuel for even bolder decisions and unexpected consequences. Each ethical dilemma strengthens Donnie's psychological complexity, preparing him to face not only external challenges, but also the labyrinths of his own conscience. And it is precisely this internal struggle that leads us to the next conflict. More intimate and emotional, his relationship with life, death, and destiny. Destiny, the perception of time, and the inevitability of death. Donnie Darko has a perception of time that escapes the ordinary, as if each instant carried hidden meaning. He feels omens, observes patterns, and senses events before they even occur. This awareness creates internal tension to act or not to act, to intervene or to let the natural course unfold. For anyone, the feeling that time is not linear would be disconcerting. For Donnie, it is the core of his psychological struggle. The idea of destiny permeates his mind, making each choice heavier. He wonders whether he is in control or merely a piece of a larger plan guided by invisible forces. This ambiguity between free will and predestination generates simultaneous anxiety and fascination. The audience feels it in their skin. Each scene becomes a dance between expectation and surprise. And every decision Donnie makes carries existential weight. The inevitability of death is a constant theme in his journey. Donnie has an almost hyperbolic awareness of his own mortality and of the vulnerability of those around him. This perception does not paralyze him. On the contrary, it challenges him to understand the meaning of life and action. The conflict between living fully and accepting inevitable destiny creates a unique psychological tension that captures the viewer's attention from beginning to end. Frank the Rabbit also reinforces this notion of fatality. He acts as a messenger and a reminder that time is limited and that certain events are unavoidable. Donnie begins to experience moments of simultaneous clarity and terror, realizing that his actions can alter outcomes, but that some forces remain immutable. This game between intervention and acceptance makes each scene loaded with suspense and introspection. The emotional impact of this perception is profound. Donnie lives a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and constant urgency. He feels he must act, but never knows exactly how or when. It is a powerful metaphor for anyone who has ever felt that time runs too fast or that important decisions are beyond our control. This tension creates immediate empathy with the audience, who see themselves reflected in their own life experiences. Moreover, this awareness of destiny influences his relationships and behaviors. Donnie begins to value moments, test limits, and challenge norms, aware that every action has consequences. He learns that living intensely is not just enjoying the present, but understanding the complexity of choices. This early maturity, even amid confusion and fear, makes him an incredibly human character. A fascinating point is how Donnie balances humor and irony even in the face of this existential tension. He observes the absurdity of daily life, questions the linearity of time, and finds small ways to react to the inevitability of death. This contrast between deep awareness and ironic lightness gives the narrative a flow that connects the viewer almost intimately with his mind. Finally, the perception of destiny and mortality shapes every future decision Donnie makes, preparing him to face events that will challenge not only his sanity, but his very essence. It is this conflict that intertwines with all the previous ones, creating a web of emotional and psychological tension that inevitably leads us to the next challenge: his emotional relationships and the search for meaning. Emotional relationships and the search for connection. Donnie Darko seeks connection amid internal chaos, and his relationship with Gretchen is the most human reflection of that need. He sees in her something real, someone who shares vulnerability and authenticity, even if silently. This search for connection is almost a longing for emotional survival, showing that no matter how complex and confused he may be, the desire to connect is universal. At the same time, this relationship brings dilemmas. Donnie fears exposing himself completely, afraid of not being understood. Each gesture of affection or word can seem risky, as if rejection were amplified by the weight of his own insecurities. It is a delicate dance between closeness and defense, which keeps the viewer attentive to each interaction, perceiving nuances of love, fear, and curiosity. Gretchen represents for Donnie both safety and a mirror. She reflects parts of his own fragility and strength, allowing him to explore feelings he normally represses. It is in this space of mutual trust that he begins to experience emotional growth, learning to balance control and surrender. This dynamic is fascinating because it humanizes Donnie in a profound way, bringing him closer to the audience. On the other hand, the intensity of this connection brings emotional risk. Donnie feels the weight of protecting and at the same time not losing those he loves. Every decision becomes measured, not only by destiny or Frank's instructions, but by the impact on the people who care about him. It is a rich psychological conflict, mixing morality, vulnerability, and adolescent love. In addition, this search for affection also reveals social fragilities. Donnie quickly realizes that not everyone is prepared to deal with his complexity. He faces judgment, misunderstanding, and small disappointments, reinforcing his sense of isolation. But at the same time, each successful connection becomes a silent victory, reminding the audience that true relationships are worth the effort. An interesting aspect is how Donnie balances humor and lightness in this relationship. Even amid tension and fear, small provocations, ironies, and curious looks create moments of identification and empathy. The audience connects because these nuances reflect universal experiences of passion, fear of rejection, and emotional discoveries. It is as if we were living each feeling alongside him. This search for connection is not limited to Gretchen. Donnie experiences relationships with classmates, teachers, and family members that challenge his perception of trust and intimacy. Each interaction becomes a silent test, revealing layers of his personality that only manifest under emotional tension. And it is precisely this complexity that keeps the viewer captivated, curious to see how he moves through this universe of emotions. Finally, Donnie's need for connection fuels other conflicts, such as morality, destiny, and perception of reality. Each emotional relationship is a mirror, a bridge, and sometimes an obstacle. This web of emotions sets the stage for the next great challenge facing the climax of his journey, where his choices, perceptions, and bonds collide inevitably. The integration of all conflicts and the confrontation of final destiny reaching the climax, Donnie Darko must integrate all the internal conflicts that have haunted him: displacement, morality, perception of time, destiny, emotional relationships, and the presence of Frank. Each layer of his complex mind converges toward critical decisions that will define not only his path, but also the impact on those around him. It is as if each previous experience had been a test, preparing him for the inevitable. At this moment, psychological tension intensifies. Donnie realizes that time, destiny, and his actions are intertwined in a cycle impossible to ignore. Each choice becomes a complex equation of cause and effect, and he understands that there are no shortcuts or easy solutions. The viewer feels the same urgency, as if about to witness something irreversible and transformative. The awareness of his responsibilities reaches its peak. Donnie understands that he must accept certain inevitabilities, even if the price is painful. He looks at his emotional bonds and realizes that some losses are unavoidable, but that each action is essential to preserve a greater meaning. It is an early maturity that manifests in silent courage and almost philosophical determination. Frank's presence becomes symbolic at this final moment. The giant rabbit is not just a guide but a catalyst, forcing Donnie to confront his own perception of reality and morality. He must decide between following signs, accepting the complexity of destiny, and acting according to his intuition, knowing that every move can alter or consolidate the inevitable course of events. The emotional relationships he cultivated throughout the film, especially with Gretchen, add emotional weight to his decisions. He realizes that his choices affect not only himself, but also those he loves. This awareness creates intense internal conflict, since sacrificing or protecting becomes a matter of emotional and ethical survival simultaneously. Donnie integrates humor, irony, and wit even at the height of tension. He observes absurdities, reacts with lightness amid the weight, and keeps fragments of his humanity intact. This balance makes the final moment more impactful and realistic, allowing the audience to feel not only the gravity of the situation, but also Donnie's humanity amid chaos. Each previous conflict converges into action and reflection. Donnie must unite morality, courage, temporal perception, self-knowledge, and emotional bonds to face the outcome. It is a moment of intense psychological synthesis, where the viewer follows not only external choices, but also a profound and complex inner evolution that makes his journey unforgettable. In the end, Donnie Darko's confrontation with his final destiny is not just a narrative climax, but the culmination of all the conflicts that shaped his mind and emotions. Each trauma, each insight, each emotional connection intertwines, showing that the journey is as internal as it is external. And it is precisely this integration of experiences that prepares us to reflect on the meaning of his story and the lasting impact of his journey. So, what did you think of diving into Donnie Darko's mind? Were you able to feel some of the tension, dilemmas, and complexity he faces? I want to know which character you want me to analyze in the next video on the channel. Leave it here in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any deep dives into the psychology of your favorite characters. Turn on the notification bell too, because here, with every video, you will discover things you never imagined about the mind behind the stories.